Welcome to Journals of Self-Discovery. Welcome to what is the second episode of Journals of Self-Discovery. My guest today is Bob Cergol. I first crossed paths with Bob many years ago, in the early 1990s actually, when I moved to Richard Rose's farm. Bob was actually moving away at the time and beginning a new chapter in his life. Since that time, I've heard Bob speak at numerous TAT Foundation meetings, and I helped compile a number of his essays, which appear in the book Beyond Mind, Beyond Death. Though Bob is not a poet, I think his words come from a place of wisdom and poignancy that is poetic. And I hope that this interview captures some of the magic that's in Bob's words. Well, Bob, I actually just wanted to start a question with something that you recently wrote in the TAT Foundation's online magazine. And basically this is a paraphrase of something that you wrote. And you said, let's define ego 2 as the personality, and ego 1 as the sense of I am alive as me behind that personality. And then you further said, I think it's become an increasingly common New Age experience to see that personality as non-existent, and that is a relatively easy experience to come by. I think the proliferating spiritual experiences we hear more and more of today are manufactured by ego 1. And the reason is that the widespread conventional teaching of today's New Age movement, known mostly today as non-dualism and Advaita, starts with a premise, a conclusion, and prescribes techniques declared in advance as leading to that conclusion. And this piece really struck me because that's something that I certainly think about a lot and run into a lot, are people who are claiming that they are enlightened, claiming that they are realized, yet it seems to be something different than what you are talking about in terms of that experience. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, perhaps what inspired you to write this.
Well, listening to you now, what I remember is in the early days of my group work at OSU in Columbus, I had a lot of older people. I think I was 19 years old at the time, or 20, and I had students or post-students coming to meetings, and they were in their mid to late 20s, and they were, professed to be enlightened, and I wasn't very good at debating them because I, didn't have much perspective back then. But they were followers of Alan Watts, and it seemed like the idea that people could see that they weren't their bodies, that they could they would somehow split themselves or dissociate from their personality. And the fact that they could observe their personality, they would get to some sort of perspective and say, "Oh yeah, I got it. I'm not. I'm the person watching this other person." And they thought that perspective was somehow Zen Satori or something. But clearly they didn't have the kind of transcendence of self that someone like Bernadette Roberts writes about when she in her book The Experience of No Self. As far as I can't tell you exactly what inspired me to write those words at the time. I was watching the fireworks display that evening, and something had been rolling around my mind. I just, the other thing I would connect to that is I've heard, even at TAP meetings, different presenters talk about focusing the attention in the body. And, that is a technique to bring about realization. And I don't see how it's possible. I think that, getting yourself into a completely relaxed state, where you feel like you've transcended the mundane personality. You've got some calm and you can see more clearly. That the I, that central point of self-awareness, of I, of being you, is very insulated and protected in that moment, I think. And you're not seeing him. I need to kind of turn the words around and start this start over, because the way reading all that stuff to me and asking me the question that way has pulled me down a different path with the words than I might have started with. I have frequently said that your sense of self is an experience. And your most immediate experience is your sense of self, and that which you feel yourself to be in reality is an experience. It's something that is being observed. And I think a spiritual path is basically all about defining yourself. Finding out what are you. And everybody, nobody claims to be their body. Most people, will tell you, yes, of course, I realize I'm not my body. But yet they have this notion that, I'm not my body, so I don't need my body. I don't need my body to exist. Well, apparently they need their body to the degree that every night when they go to sleep and the body seems to shut down, they seem to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that awareness is unbroken. That what their being never disappeared, and awareness never ceased. It's just that there was no external object. There was no object of the attention to focus on to generate the sense of I. So, in other words, no experience, no self.
So your idea in Ego 1 and Ego 2 is that an individual is seeing their personality, and we're calling that Ego 2, yet they're seeing that or aware of that while still maintaining a sense of, I am Sean, for example. I am an individual who's noticing a personality, or noticing thoughts, or noticing feelings. Is that what you're getting at?
People have conversations with themselves. They argue with themselves all the time. If you sit quietly in meditation and you watch your thoughts, at some point you kind of get you see that there's the thoughts that you're watching, but then there's this, you have a sense of being you watching those thoughts.
Right.
What I'm saying is that, okay, so that watcher is Ego 1, and the thoughts, or the personality, or that people get lost in when they're really lost in living their life, lost in experience, like you get lost when you're driving a car, that would be Ego 2. And that Ego 1 is still in the view, is still something, it's still an experience, it's an object in the attention. Mm-hmm. And the thing of it is that power of attention, that awareness, does not belong to that thing that has this sense of being alive, that I, Bob Cergol, or Sean. That awareness does not need for that sense of Sean being Sean to be there. Mm-hmm. The words really fall apart, and
Sure.
For all I know, maybe Pullian didn't mean ego 1, ego 2 in the same way that I'm talking about it, but
In the satsang scene, the non-duality scene, there's certainly a lot of talk about people sitting with teachers and having an experience of being awareness, being a non-personal awareness, and this seems to be something that can happen just in a moment.
yeah.
What do you think is going on?
I think it's a glimpse. I think it's I mean, by virtue of their core being, there's a capacity to, for want for a better word, experience that. But when people are having that experience, it's like the experience is happening from the point of reference of the eye. The eye, it's still happening inside of the eye sense. The eye is still anterior. It's kind of like if you ask them about it, they would say, well, yeah, I had this experience. I had this sense that I was, I was whatever. That it was an experience that was happening to them. They didn't get behind that which was having that experience.
And would you call that enlightenment? That getting behind that which has the experience?
Yeah, seeing your own non-existence, knowing what remains when nothing of you will remain. When death, it's a death experience, and that sounds really dramatic, and like Rose used to talk about it. I remember him saying one time that he laughed when people talked about having this like a wow experience or some trivial thing that and they equated with enlightenment. And he'd say that, no, he said, when you have this experience, they're going to carry you out on a stretcher. It's going to be this cataclysmic, and I think people have different experiences. In fact, that part of realization, enlightenment is not an experience. It's a realization, but it's there's an experience that accompanies it, and I think that experience has a pretty huge range of manifestation. So you could have somebody with a monumental ego who's been just living a certain life, and then they something happens to them. They have this realization, and the shock and the crashing down of everything that they thought they were is so traumatic that they can translate into an intense, drawn-out, traumatic experience. For someone else who maybe over a much longer period of time. I kind of see myself this way, that my association with Rose, being around him so much, I had so many glimpses and so many things, so many experiences, so many realizations along the way happened to me, but I always put them off on him. I was kind of being inoculated. So when this breakthrough finally happened, it wasn't terribly traumatic. I had some trauma prior to that. I had some, highly emotional experiences leading up to that, where I guess Rose might refer to them as the mountain experience, where I saw life as an illusion, completely dreamlike, and it was very upsetting. And I remember during this one experience, I was so upset by it that I was convinced that was the answer. I remember I was talking out loud to myself and cursing and saying, "Why would anybody think that this is a good thing for, and talk about it and say, oh, to other people, you should have this same experience." I was kind of angry and upset at the same time. And I called Rose. That was one of the very, very few times I ever picked up the phone and felt like I would actually call him and ask him about an experience, because usually I felt foolish or like self-conscious about talking, but this time I needed to call him, and so when I called, and Cece answered the phone, and she put him on, and as soon as he said hello, this is after the Alzheimer's had developed, and he was still living at the farmhouse. But as soon as he got on the phone and said hello, there was just something in his voice. I just knew immediately that he couldn't help me.
Yeah.
And but so there was some weeks, many weeks after that this, in reading that Pullian letter, that the other shoe dropped. And so I guess my whole point there is that I think I was inoculated to things. I don't think I had the kind of traumatic experience that Rose writes about in the 3 books of the Absolute, because for him it was such a out of nowhere, utterly different shock realization than anything he had come close to or read about even up to that point. Whereas me, I'd been around him for 20 years and had a lot of these experiences, like you mentioned earlier, of feeling immersed in eternality and awareness and all this. But through all those experiences, Bob Cergol was very much intact, and those things belonged to me. They were happening to me, and I was always felt like they were adding something to me, and I was making progress. And they were milestones on the path, proving to me that I was going to, get there. And the thing that nobody allows for is that you can't get enlightened because it's you have to go. It's not something that can happen to you. There's some part of you that is all that there is of you, and the personality that is dancing around on the stage that wants this experience can't have it. So anyway, it's
wow. I think we could end the podcast right there, Bob. Just leave the listeners with that thought. You've mentioned Richard Rose and Alfred Pullian as obviously 2 people who were important along your path. Would you say that your spiritual path began when you met Richard Rose?
Yeah, that's a kind of a trick question in my own mind. Not that you're posing a trick question, but in terms of a conscious idea that I had, that there was such a thing called a spiritual path and that I was going to embark on one, the answer would be yes. But when I look back over my life, I realized that there was something in me that I was always looking for an answer. And I think it's true of, it's in every human being. Every human being is you come into this world feeling like, I'm alive. I think of that Frankenstein movie where the creature says, I'm alive.
Right.
So that happens to us at some incredibly young age, but we don't know what we are. And we see this world that we're always in danger of being swallowed by. And so we're always trying to figure out, what are we? And one way to view our lives is the entire life is an unfolding story of trying to figure out who and what we are, and reconcile ourselves, and comfort ourselves, and learn how to die. I remember one of my earliest memories is sitting on a stairwell in a house where my parents, their first house after they got married, there were 3 kids in the family, and one morning my mother got a phone call that her father had died, and I think I might have been, I don't think I was in school, so I might have been like 3, maybe 4 years old, and I didn't understand what's going on, but I didn't know hear the words that my grandfather died. I knew that my mom was incredibly upset, and she was on the phone. I was sitting on the steps eavesdropping, and I guess I must have heard something along the way about the death, because it made such an impression on me. So at some young age, I felt like there was something wrong. There's something wrong in this whole picture, and you know, and then I was taking the Catholic Mass growing up, and this is in the old days when the Mass was in Latin, and there was a lot of pomp and ceremony, and I was moved by that. That resonated with me. So I don't know. I've always, from my earliest days, I can remember feeling like something was missing, like something was wrong with me. That I needed to figure out what was going to happen with my life. And so by the time I met Rose, I mean, my dilemma, the dilemma was what was I going to be? Because my first year of college, I was like really traumatized by what am I? I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I didn't know what I should major in. I didn't know what I was going to become, but I was keenly aware of the fact that it didn't matter whether I knew or not, that I was going to become something anyway, and that kind of scared me. So I actually dropped out of school. It's kind of floundering, and then that first year, when I say I dropped out, I finished my first year, and I didn't plan on going back. I didn't re-enroll, and then at the end of the summer, I was so confounded by this. What am I going to be? What am I going to do? And I thought, well, if I don't go back to school, I'm really starting down the path of I'm going to turn into something that I don't know what. And so school was my escape. Going back to school was somehow a way of delaying that process from happening. I can go back to school and still work on figuring out what I was going to become. And that's when I ran into Richard Rose, and he put the thought in my head. He said, my God, what you could become is a seeker. You could become the person whose mission in life is to figure all these questions out. And that was actually a valid endeavor. And so it was simultaneously a huge escape, because it kind of gave me the answer I couldn't figure out. It allowed me to rationalize. Oh yeah, that's perfectly okay. I don't have to pick a career. I don't have to figure all this other stuff out. What I'm going to do is dedicate myself to a spiritual quest. So yeah, he made me. The other thing about him is you could pick something up around him that he didn't just talk about it. You could feel that it was real. So, intellectually, he made you aware of something called a spiritual path, enlightenment, books and teachings, things that you could do, and then you could feel something about this person, something, otherworldly, some really intense energy. And so that was inspirational. So I kind of, that was definitely he changed the arc of my life. After meeting him, attending that first lecture, it was an introductory lecture on Zen, which I had no knowledge whatsoever about, other than that the word existed.
Would you say? I know that you spent many years with Richard Rose. What would you say would be the one or two greatest lessons, if you will, that you learned from him?
Making a commitment, that if you wanted to find anything out, you had to resolve that you were going to find something out, and it wasn't enough to just say, okay, I want to find an answer. That you had to live it. So that and the other thing that I always that was maybe even bigger to me back then is he really made me keenly aware of our capacity to delude ourselves. Rationalization and our ability to lie to ourselves. So I think I always suspected that intuitively. So when I heard somebody talk extensively about that, it just rang bells and resonated with me. And his teaching was so I don't know if generic is the right word, but it didn't get into any kind of dogma or specific concept structures like I later read about in readings on Zen or Gurdjieff Uspensky. I mean, it's pretty basic common sense stuff. You got to first know thyself, first know yourself. And how are you going to do that? Well, what tools do you have? You've got your senses in your mind, and so you can start and you have yourself to look at how you're living your life, the actions what do you do, why do you do that, what you do, what motivates you, and as you're looking at that stuff, to realize that you have the capacity to rationalize, meaning you don't see clearly. So that kind of became an obsession for me. I wanted to see clearly, and I remember when I was younger, I was saying go back to middle, like grade school, 5th, 6th grade. I remember I used to get this image or vision in my head that there was a perspective that, like, if you could rise up off the earth and look down from some very high place, you could kind of see everything and understand how it all worked, what it was all about. I don't know that I articulated it to myself that way, but I just kind of had this picture in the back of my head. So I think that running into Rose kind of dovetailed with that, or inspired, or resonated with that.
Yeah. Now I know that at a certain point, I may have the story wrong, but you essentially decided to give up on the spiritual path, and can you tell a little bit about what led to that?
Yeah, I had been at this for, I don't know, I met Rose when I was 19, and let's see, when I was into my mid-30s anyway. I think when I moved out to my cabin, Rose was getting sick at the time, and after 20 years goes by, and you start to think about, well, what are you doing with your life? Where have you gotten?
Right.
And when you when you live by yourself, I was living in isolation. I was working. I was self-employed, so I basically had a full-time job. I mean, I kept busy. But when you live alone, in all the quiet spaces between when you're preoccupied with something, you have to face yourself. There's nothing else to look at, and so things start bubbling up in your mind. And I kind of realized that that I'd been kidding myself. That on the one hand, I was trying to make this path my top priority, and follow, live my life according to all the teachings of Rose, doing group work, meditating every day, all that stuff, being celibate. But on the other hand, I felt like, I never was 100% committed. There's always this part of me that wanted to be in the world, wanted to, progress in my career and have a family. And I don't know, I just remember I had a vision one day in the cabin. I used to drive into Elm Grove to use the YMCA. I'd swim there and use their shower. And I was driving in one day, and I kind of had a vision in my mind of, like, okay, fast forward 20 years from then, if I never found an ultimate answer, if I never got enlightened, what would I at least want out of life? And in that moment, driving the car, kind of just, it just seemed really clear to me. I wanted, at a minimum, I wanted to be able to look back on my life and feel like I had at least experienced life, and was part of humanity. I felt so detached from humanity. I mean, I lived like a hermit, you know, even though, even when I wasn't living in my cabin, and I was still lived alone and kind of didn't participate in life. I didn't join groups. Didn't social, you know, other than Pyramid Zen group meetings and that sort of thing. I didn't live like the average person did. I lived basically like a monk, but I wasn't in a monastery. And I just realized that wasn't satisfying me, and if I never got an answer, if I was honest with myself, I at least wanted to die having been connected and with other people and having had relationships. I don't mean a one-on-one man-woman relationship, but I mean just like the family I'd grown up in. I grew up, my mom's family, they had like eight, I think there were nine kids in it. So I had 8 aunts and uncles on her side of the family, and which spawned well over 100 cousins. All the weddings I went to growing up, there were never less than 100 people at. And it was a very tight-knit family. So I started to value, you know, that kind of a lifestyle where you had a lot of relationships with different people. So I just kind of thought, you know, it hasn't happened. Rose hasn't sent that wheelbarrow for me, and I'm kidding myself. So you know what? I'm not gonna pretend I'm on this fence. I'm just gonna put both feet on the other side of the fence. I'm gonna just put myself out there, circulate, see if I maybe meet somebody, could end up getting married, and just pursue my career and stop reading books or meditating. You know, just. And so that's what I did. But by that time, I'd had this mental vector, this vector of my attention. After all those years, there was a momentum of a direction in my looking that I could, you know, it's kind of like a flywheel. You can suddenly stop giving it a little push to keep it going. You can stop doing that, and the flywheel keeps spinning all by itself. So while living this mundane life, there was still this inner, this what Rose would call a reverse vector. So the vector of my attention was away from external experience and inward towards inner experience, and then even beyond that, what's behind that. And I didn't think consciously about it. I was just kind of, that would become my default mode of thinking. Particularly if any conflict of any kind arose, which is what happens to everybody. So I think that process for me, that's universal, happens to everybody. The difference is one of a commitment and desire. I thought you were in thinking about the call that I thought, one of the questions he's probably going to ask me is like, what do you think is the most important thing that somebody can do on a spiritual path? And I've
such a terrible question. I would never ask such a thing.
I mean, I've written a lot of notes over the years and made a few speeches and all that, and I sometimes I think the older I get, the less dogmatic I get, the less sure I am about any formulations. But some things become more firm. The more generic, I guess, the more generic things become more firm. And Rose talked about commitment. You have to act. There's this philosopher called Kierkegaard, which I haven't studied, but I remember in high school I stumbled on this book in the library, and the title of it was "Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing." And that really captivated my mind for some reason. And so I got that book and I read it. I don't think I understood 95% of it, but the title always stuck with me. And I think that's it. But will to me is questionable. I mean, you can really debate how much will anybody has. So I would say purity of heart is to desire one thing. And you have to want an answer, and everybody wants an answer. The difference is how do you which desires? Well, purity is you have to want one thing. So you at certain times in your life you want different things more than other things. In my case, there was some that desire was a common constant thread through my life, and obviously I didn't articulate it that way to myself, but I wanted to know God. The way I translated it as a young boy is I wanted to be close to God. I wanted to know God, and that formulation came from my Catholic teaching. So this inner desire got cloaked in that verbiage. But then when I moved away from the Catholic faith, I think by the time I graduated from high school, I wasn't a Catholic anymore. But I still had this desire. So then I ran into Richard Rose, and so I had a completely different, much better formulation of it. And one of the things, this thing about commitment, you can only have one top priority, so you can't satisfy every desire. So the thing to do is to choose the ones that you're going to focus on. And that's what I did. That's what I did with him for those 20 years. I think in the first year I met him, I sold my record collection. Those albums today, those vinyl albums today, would be pretty valuable. And I started reading philosophical books. I started meditating, and the more I did that, the more it kind of increased that desire. It gave it more prominence. So I guess getting back to the idea of purity of heart is to desire one thing. I started to turn away from lesser desires and remember. That's the other thing I always say is a daily remembrance, and that's I kind of, because of my Catholic upbringing, I was trained and conditioned, to say daily prayer. So when that kind of morphed into a daily remembrance of this desire, and then it's not enough to just desire something. You have to actually manifest. You have to act on it. You have to demonstrate to yourself that you're sincere and that you're not just making it up by actually doing something. And that becomes a mutually reinforcing cycle. You want something, therefore you do something in service to that want, and it reinforces to the mind that yes, that is what I want. And then if to the degree you're successful, it reinforces it even more. And to the degree that you're not successful, the fact that you made the effort still reinforces it. So if you start feeding other desires, it starts to displace that. You get into different forms of dissipation. It just you split yourself. The thing about one of the things Rose harped about, getting back to this rationalization, and that I've learned, and it's gotten just reinforced over the years, just how utterly and totally mechanical our thoughts. The thoughts are utterly and totally reactionary and always follow the body. So I kind of intuited that even at the very beginning after meeting Rose, when I'd sit in meditation and start the meditation by recalling some affliction, some conflict, or really past conflict or trauma, basically any affliction to the sense of self. The idea was just to look at it, and that would evoke a lot of thoughts. Well, at some point, I'd suddenly become aware how sucked into the thinking about it that I became, and then I realized, no, I'm sure that's a dead end. That just becomes kind of like a loop of just a noise. And so I'd turn my attention away from that and go back to just looking at the original seed thought of whatever the conflict was. Let's say you had some experience where somebody made you angry or somebody made you feel bad about yourself. To me, the thing to look at is that feeling, not to analyze it, because behind that feeling is it's raising what I equate with the Zen doubt sensation. If you have any kind of conflict or something makes you angry, the anger comes from there's some form of threat behind it. Or if you feel bad about yourself, well, then you're even closer to that threat. So it casts doubt on who and what you are. And that's very confounding to the mind. Your whole purpose in life is to validate yourself, to validate who and what you are in this existence, not go in the other direction. So staring at that, you're on anyone that's in that when you have that focus of attention, when the doubt sensation is the object of your attention, you're right on the edge of being able to see, to transcend the self. And even though you could be right on the edge, and it seems like, well, boy, it would be so simple to just go, for that to happen. Everything about the machinery is just knee-jerk, instantaneously in the opposite direction, because this flywheel that has started spinning, probably even in the womb, by the time you make it to an age where you think about this sort of stuff, that flywheel has got so much mass and so much momentum to spinning everything into something that reinforces your identity and validates that this I am me, this sense of self is real. That you immediately spin it. So pain gets something that challenges you gets actually spun into something that validates you. Obviously, pleasure validates you. Pleasure. Nobody ever. I never heard of anybody becoming introspective or reflective or philosophical after some pleasurable, or they won $1 million, or they got a job promotion, or somebody just told them how wonderful they are, or they did something that reflects back to them how wonderful they are. It doesn't make them introspective. Pain makes people reflective, but as soon as they look at the pain, they start to spin it around. Like, an easy example of that is when you get in an argument or somebody offends you, your mind just generates a deluge of thought about, that justifies yourself, why you were correct, why they were wrong. And so you do this in your own mind when if you're trying to ask yourself a question. Well, why did I behave this way? How did I end up where I am? Why did I make that decision? The mind instantly goes in the direction of rationalizing, justifying, because it's all about affirming the self. No one's ever going to diminish themselves unless they're a masochist, but then that's a negative form of affirmation. The firms that have got some twisted negative concept of themselves, and they're going to affirm that.
So keeping with this idea of purity of intent, I believe you said, or purity of desire?
Well, desire. I mean, Kierkegaard used the word will, and I said, well, just substitute it with purity of heart is to desire one thing.
My question is, one might look at the 20 years that you spent with Richard Rose and reading and meditating and being hermit-like, and then look at the time in which you moved back into being more engaged with the world and getting married and having children and so forth, and might say, well, the former was clearly greater purity of heart than the latter. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd go back to the vector idea. I mean, basically, the spiritual path is a reverse vector. That was Rose's teaching. What is the direction of your attention? What is the object of your attention? So when I pulled away stop making effort or stop imagining, I was living a life a certain way and had a certain goal in mind, and threw that overboard. I'm struggling for words here, how to say this. So when in my daily work, obviously I'd go to work and I'd lose myself in I did a lot of computer programming. So, the object of my attention while I'm writing a computer program is writing logic, writing code. But then when you stop, when your attention focuses on something, when you're not focused on anything, where does your attention land? What is its resting point? And particularly when if something happens, like let's say an uncle dies, or you witness the birth of your first child, or you're living a life. For me, my attention just seemed to be collapsing in on itself. I'd be it would just turn inward. I don't know how else to say it. So it was like I'd been trying to look behind the curtain for 20, 25, 30 years, and when I stopped trying, that's the direction that my attention went in when I wasn't looking at anything else. And so the process kept going.
Would you call that habit? Just a habit of mind that you had developed over years?
Yeah, you could use the word habit, but I really think it's I like the word vector because if you think about it, we lose ourselves in experience. I mean, our entire life is just one big experience, and the person who's having the experience, that person is part of the experience. It's like, so we're lost in that, and so the attention is totally outwardly focused. So if you fast forward and think, okay, what's the object of your attention going to be when you're on your deathbed? It might be fear. It might be assuming you don't know what your mental condition is going to be, but you're constantly looking at experience. So to me, the spiritual path is reversing the vector of the attention, and instead of looking at experience, start to become the witness. Like instead of getting sitting in the movie theater and being totally lost in the story on the screen, the attention kind of turns around, and all of a sudden you realize you're sitting in a chair watching a movie, and then you start looking at that person sitting in the chair and looking at his reactions and saying, oh, look at he's getting angry at that character, and he's getting really sad at this other character, and then you start to see the patterns of that that character. So that's a different direction of the attention. You're kind of withdrawing it from. I guess it suggests that there's layers of experience, and there are. I mean, your most immediate experience is the experience of yourself, and that's the last. That's one of the last things that you can actually see as an experience.
And that would be ego one that you were referring to earlier, that core.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make too much of the ego one, ego two thing, because there's only one sense of self. It's just a
right.
mental concoction that you could ask yourself a question and then you could answer it. And it's like,
Right.
I think Rose wrote a poem one time. He said, if you ask a question and hear the sound of your own voice answering it, how many people are speaking?
So ego 1 and ego 2 both have the core word of ego there. And so they're variations of a theme, if you will.
Yeah, I think Poyen's point was that it was just it's just another way of how we trick ourselves, how we lie to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another example of that is somebody who, let's say, somebody's a bully. He lives his life like a bully, but he has this self-concept, this self-image that he's just such a wonderful, compassionate person. He can't see that he's a bully. And if so, he's like split. He's two different people. He's the personality that acts one way, and then the personality who spins it to himself another way because he wants to see himself a certain way. And anything that happens to make him see the bully, he turns away from. So that same sort of pattern can happen with somebody on a spiritual path where they say, "Oh, I see that I'm transcend. I'm not the bully. I'm just and I forgive that bully."
So Poyen, who's Alfred Poyen, I understand that at some point after you left Richard Rose's farm, you came across this correspondence between Alfred Poyen, who was a rather obscure Zen master, and Richard Rose. And what effect or how did that catalyze your search coming across that correspondence?
Well, the context of that is that something was unfolding in me. We talked about how I made the decision to stop my spiritual path. I got married in less than a year. I got married, moved to a different city, and my wife got pregnant. So we had bought a house, changed jobs, essentially, and had a baby, all in less than 12 months. So that was a lot of stress or change. And relatives started dying, and I started to feel like I was just had let go. I hadn't consciously let go, but I had started to feel like I was on this, definitely was losing control, was on this toboggan, and their life was moving past me, and I was, kind of using the car analogy, I was in the center of all this stuff happening around me, and it was changing my perspective, and I was finding myself getting more and more moved by things. I remember when I was searching for a house in Raleigh, I remember one house I had to get out of as fast as I could before I started weeping, because it was a resale of a couple, elderly woman who, she was at the end of her life, and the house was just dripping with all the memorabilia of her life, and I could just see the arc of a whole lifetime of another family come and go, and it just made me feel like I was receding and seeing this, the circle of life sort of thing. It was dramatic and moving to me. Anyway, so that was kind of going on in the background, and at the same time I decided, well, maybe I should start making some effort to get, do something on a spiritual level. And so Art Tickner had proposed this idea of the I.O. ignoramuses online, have a confrontation group done through email. And so he engineered some logistics to make it workable, so you don't have, endless cross threads mushrooming into an unmanageable amount of email. It was very structured. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to do it around these Poyen letters that, were, as you said, they were Rose's correspondence with this Zen teacher. And Rose always had talked about Poyen as somebody that he learned of after he had his realization, and he was struggling, trying to figure out, like, how do you go about talking to people about this stuff? How would you teach them? How would you help somebody arrive at this realization? And he learned about Poyen, who was supposedly a Zen master who knew how to transmit. And Rose always claimed that he learned how to transmit from Poyen. So anyway, I had these letters, and I made up my mind that I was not going to just read this stack of letters like a book and read through them. I was going to instead read them one by one, separated in time as if they were written to me, as if I were corresponding with Pulyan. And so I read the first letter, I was also in this IO group. I think I did the first letter, so I was the monitor for the first round. There were like three rounds of somebody would read a letter, write an email about it, pose questions from it, and then everybody else would read that same letter, read my questions, and they would respond. And then I would respond to their questions, kind of confronting them on their responses. They would respond back again, and then I would respond back. So that on the third round, that constituted one round, and then the next person would become the monitor and take the next letter. So anyway, I read this first letter, and it was something about the tone of the letter really came across to me, that how serious. I mean, Pulyan struck me like, wow, this guy is this is the real deal. This guy knows, and he's really sincere and intense. So I read that letter, and then I don't know. So 3 weeks went by. I don't remember exactly. I always have to go back and search notes to figure out dates and exact sequence. But anyway, it became my turn again for another letter, and I was reading. And by the way, I was my personal life. I had a lot of stress at the time. It's like my wife wasn't working. I had a big mortgage. I had a baby. And I was self-employed, and I was making a living off of obsolete software I'd written that was DOS-based software, and Windows was becoming the world, and and my system needed to be completely rewritten, and I couldn't do that because I couldn't learn how to do it and actually do it and do the work to service my existing customers that generated my income. So I was in a quandary, and I just figured this thing is. I just lived in daily fear that the whole thing was just going to collapse, and I was going to lose everything. So I didn't know, but I just kept. I didn't know what else to do other than to stay on that treadmill and just keep, riding that horse until it collapsed. So I was busy, and I remember I was coming up against the deadline for having to write this stuff up. These IO sessions were a tremendous amount of work, because you had to read the letter and then be very, very thoughtful and write stuff down, and then you had to do that with like 8 people in the group. Anyway, so I thought, well, it was like 11 o'clock one night, and I thought I'll read this next letter and just kind of throw it into the hopper, and it can be simmering in the background. And I remember I was really, really tired, so I read this letter from him. And this other letter was he's answering a series of questions that Rose posed to him. I didn't have Rose's side of the correspondence, but I knew Rose well enough that I could kind of fill in blanks in certain places. And so when he started answering these questions, and he got to the one where Pulyan says, regarding the question, I knew immediately which question he was talking about, because Rose always talked about that every religion or philosophy needed to answer 3 questions in order to be a complete philosophy, and that was, where did I come from, who am I, and where am I going? So the regarding the question had to do with where are you going, what happens to you when you die, and Pulyan's answer to that question basically he pulled the rug out from under me. The question was, let me see, he wrote it regarding the question, the body dies and is dissipated, which everybody knows that. Nobody argues with that. So okay, yeah, I'm right with you there. My mind is locked on your. I was already intently focused on this letter, and this, of course, this happened quickly, right? Because I'm reading this. It doesn't take that long to read it as it does to talk about it. So the body dies and is dissipated. The mind, which is at all times one with the body, likewise perishes and is dissipated. that was kind of a jaw dropper for me because, I mean, I didn't resist the idea, and it just made sense to me. It struck me as true, and I had to, most everybody has this idea that the mind and the body are completely separate things, and that you can start chopping parts of the body off until you get, if you could somehow keep the heart and the lungs, if you chopped everything off at the waist, and including your arms, and you get up to the head, as long as you have the head left, your brain, your mind, then you're intact. You're exactly the same. And what Pullian was saying is that they're inseparable, and there's no difference. The body, the mind, which is at all, I don't know if I just quoted it this way, but he said the mind which is at all times one with the body. I left that out, I think. He said the mind which is at all times one with that body likewise perishes and is dissipated. And that was kind of like, I think that did what Rose would call knocked my head on dead center, because that kind of stopped me from thinking. I was like, yeah, they're, you can't really, if you're honest, if you think about it and don't fantasize, for all you know, I mean, that's absolutely true. So he had me locked on that thought, and then the body, which is at all times one with the mind, which is all times one with that body, likewise perishes and is dissipated. Nothing of you will remain. And it cracked my head open, so to speak, because in that instant, it's like I became something. I was something that was neither the body or the mind, and the brilliance of those words when I thought about him is, he didn't say nothing remains. He said nothing of you remains. Well, you can't intellectually answer the question like if he had said, well, what do you think remains if you subtract everything that's not you? No one can parse that. That as soon as you start trying to parse a phrase like that, that's when the spinning kicks in, and whatever you come up with is something that affirms the sense of self. But that's the progression for me in the circumstance at that moment. It was my brick in the pavement, and but the really odd thing was it was so late. I was so tired, and I didn't know. It's like, well, how do you react? What was I going to do? I mean, what would my next reaction be? I mean, I was kind of on this autopilot treadmill. I felt dissociated. I just felt really strange. But I had to go to bed. I was dead tired. So I remember I walking down the hallway to my bedroom, feeling really strange. I got ready for bed, and I sat on the side of the bed and, kind of looked at, I don't know how to describe this, but it's like my attention is still turned inside of itself. My attention is, my attention is totally locked in this other place, and yet there's this body going down, this body getting ready for bed, and so this, which I'm aware of. So it's like I'm dissociated, but still seeing this. It was kind of like an out-of-body experience, but I think that's a poor way to describe it. Anyway, so I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and my first conscious thought was, am I still feeling? Is it still there? Do I still have this strange perception, for lack of a better word? And so I did, and I couldn't shake it. But I didn't have time to I'm convinced if I just stopped and sat to meditate, I probably would have somehow fought my way out of this and buried it somehow. Anyway, so I went back to work. Got totally lost myself in my programming or whatever. But I noticed that every time I stopped, every time my attention was not locked on, focused externally, like if I had to move from my chair 10 feet to the right to go to the printer to get a piece of paper out of, in that space where I wasn't totally absorbed in something else, I would snap back into this other dissociated sense. And my wife's downstairs with a baby, by the way. Because my office was upstairs over the kitchen, and she's down there taking care of the baby and doing household stuff and whatever. So this went on for, I don't know, weeks, a few weeks, couple weeks, at least a couple weeks. I don't remember exactly how long. And remember, I didn't have any alone time. I mean, I was, really, I mean, I didn't have a meditational discipline, so it's not like I went up to my room every night at 9 o'clock and sat and meditated. So I was,
right.
And I think that was a good thing. So one day I was particularly, it was extra intense this one day, and I was getting more obsessed with it, trying to understand what was going on in me. And I get in the car and I went out to run some errand, and driving down Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, there was just kind of a hilly, like where Ebenezer Church Road hits 70, Glenwood, heading in towards Raleigh. It's kind of hilly, and you go past some parkland. And I remember going up and down one of these hills, and like I'm on autopilot in the car. I'm totally in my head, looking at this. And I said to myself, what is this? I don't know if I actually said that, but it was kind of like that mental, like, eh. And in that moment, everything it's like the other shoe dropped, so to speak. Everything completely flipped around, and then my sense of self, Bob Cergol, everything that I was external and out there with every other object. And there was like there was just this pure awareness. And I remember shaking my head and mumbling out to myself out loud, "There is no death. There is no death. There is no death." And the reason I was saying is that because I was seeing that there was nothing to die, that all of it, including my very identity, the very I am Bob Cergol, was just something being witnessed. It was an experience the same as my eyeballs were looking out and seeing the tree, the line of trees in the sky and everything else. And it's a wonder I didn't get into an accident. But it's amazing how our bodies drive these cars on autopilot. We've all had the experience of driving 100 miles, and all of a sudden your exit comes up, or maybe you miss the exit because you have no recollection of having driven the car.
Right.
So I remember the other thing. On my way home, on the way home, I was thinking, well, where does, okay, so what if I turned around the corner of my house, my street, and saw my house in flames, and my family inside was trapped and they're going to die. And I saw this Bob Cergol, the suffering that would cause him. But it was like it was all just out there, and everything was on an equal plane. It was all the same. It was just all one big dream, one big. It wasn't real. It was an experience being witnessed, and the witnesser. After that, all these phrases from Rose's poem, the 3 Books of the Absolute. And to this day, they still just constantly bubble up in my mind. One of the things he writes in there is who speaks words with my voice, who hears words with my ears. For the keeper of the house is gone, and all that remains testifies that he never was. Stuff like that. It's like that stuff. I mean, it had a epic feel and sound to it when I heard those words over all those years. But they never really. I mean, I never really grasped what the meaning behind them was. You can't. I mean, nobody can. You can. I don't care how many times you hear it, how many books you've read, unless you've actually been through that realization, you don't know what he's talking about. And so I think a lot of the I mean, I had so many of these experiences over the years with Rose, where sitting in rapport or just walking to his house and feeling the peaceful sense of eternality and timelessness, like being immersed in that, and how pleasant it was and how profound it was. But it was, I was always fully 100% intact as me, having that experience. And so I could have, if I didn't have the perspective of Rose at the time, if that sort of stuff happened to me on my own, and I was reading Alan Watts or many other books, I might tell myself, "Hey, I'm enlightened. That's it. That's the final experience." And then I wouldn't have, maybe I would have stopped looking.
Do you think that a person who had purity of heart, that could happen to them, or would they somehow know that wasn't the final answer?
I don't know how to answer that. I guess I could imagine that someone like that, if they're, I guess it depends whether that answer satisfied them, because if the worm started to turn again, and they were honest with themselves, and they had that vector, the momentum of having pushed their attention in a certain direction for many years, and they were, maybe they'd realize, there's got to be something more, because I still don't feel I've solved the riddle.
Over the years, I've literally had, I don't know, a dozen people maybe I've come across that have had that question of, wow, something just happened to me. Am I enlightened? Did you, when this moment occurred in the car while you were driving, or in days after that, did you ever have that question of, oh gosh, am I enlightened? Is this it? Am I done?
Not really. I mean, what happened is, the intensity of this, it was pretty intense for quite a while, and then it started to, it would wax and wane. I'd go on business trips, and I remember on one of the first business trips I went on after this, when I was on site and interacting with people, it was weird. Boy, sometimes I just felt like I was in a complete dream, and people were not alive. It's like there were these mannequins, these shells I was interacting with, but there was the life was omnipresent, and it was like in the air. The only thing that was real was this living presence, omnipresence, I guess. But I couldn't dwell on that, so I'd engage in work and everything. So there was that kind of intensity. But my mind, when I would try to explain this stuff to myself, was trying to analyze what because I've got a body and a mind and a brain and a history of experience, and I'm spinning stories about how this all worked. So one of the first things I thought about was, but Rose, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. This doesn't make any sense. It's like, how could Rose always thought I just contrasted the experience of this realization with Rose's description of his, and so I thought about that. But through all that, I never had any doubt. I can't it's like what else? There can't be anything. I mean, when I don't know. I don't know how to say it other than anyone who's had that realization, you just know that's it. You don't have any doubt in your mind, and someone rightfully could say, well, how do you know you're not deluding yourself? Well, at the end of the day, there's no way to prove it or convince somebody else, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And at the end of the day, you're your own authority. You're either if you're satisfied with your answer, then either you've got the answer or you've deluded yourself. But I guess it doesn't really make any difference. I mean, seriously, it's like,
right.
I remember Dave Gold harassed me. Well, that's too strong of a word, but he would talk to me along the lines of, like don't you feel compelled to, like get out there and do stuff, and become a teacher? It's like, honestly, Sean, this idea of teaching, I don't like it. I don't. I mean, to the extent that I write anything or talk to anybody, I do it out of a sense of obligation. But if I'd never be calling you and saying, "Hey, Sean, why don't you interview me?" You asked and said, "Okay, yeah, okay." Who knows? Maybe if nobody ever asked me 5 years go by, maybe I'd build up just a unstoppable motivation that I would have to write something, and I'd write a book. But I've been busy for raising a family. I'm about done with that. But I still have a lot of bills to pay, so I still put a lot of energy into work, and I'm getting tired of it. But I see the light at the end of that tunnel. But I never felt like any compulsion to turn my life upside down. I didn't feel any, like Dave thought I should. If you had a realization like that the next day you'd quit your job, and you'd turn your life upside down. And no, I didn't make any changes. About the only change that I made in my life was I actually started in the mornings before I went to work. I would sit in silence, and I might sit for 2 minutes. I might sit for 18 minutes. I would sit however long and until it felt like I had return. I hate to use the word, but until I return to this place. I have to say it that way to find the words to describe it. And the other thing I remember is it became a paradox to me. It's like, well, what happens to me? Well, it's like I'm in this basically I'm God. I'm omnipresent. I'm eternal. And I'm so aware of this, of my being. And then I sit in front of the keyboard and start writing some lines of code, and then I'm lost. I'm totally, totally gone. And then when I stop doing that, I come back. And so I became obsessed with this idea. When that would happen, I'd stop and think, well, what happened to me? How could this be? How could that ever not be there? And every time I did that, it would become immediately obvious to me that I was there all along. It didn't disappear. That awareness never disappeared. When I would stop and look back on it, that interval of time, I realized that it was there all along. I just wasn't paying attention to it. And when I just look, I recognize that it was there the whole time. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not like I looked at it and felt, I can remember what it felt like 20 minutes ago. No, what I saw, I was like, it was there before I started focusing on programming, and it was there all during that interval of writing the programming, and now I'm just, I've turned the light beam on it. I've made that front and center in my object of attention. I think people, I've said this in some talks, because people talk about disappearing when they go to sleep, and the awareness is unbroken during sleep. What happens is there's no content. There's no content in consciousness to generate the I sense. All that's there is pure being, is the light, if you will. The light that makes makes the face on the jack-o'-lantern visible and enlivened. So when somebody, I've had this experience, and I've mentioned to suggested that others could do this. When you wake up from a dream, sometimes you wake up and you're like, you have a clear sense of the dream, and you're wide awake and you're trying to remember the dream, and you can't. You're staring into the dream content, trying to recall the content. The content's hard to recall, but sometimes the feeling. There's a background to the dream that is much easier to focus on than the specific content. And so when your attention is locked on that, and is at some point that kind of drifts away, and then for a moment you're not looking at anything, but your mind is still coasting. I think if somebody, I wonder if that could even be a practice for somebody, that you could do that, and you'd realize the awareness, that the unbroken awareness that you are, that went into sleep, came out of sleep, is with you all day long, is always right behind you. That you can't not be surrounded by, that was never born, never dies, that is all that you are. People have the idea that, we like to say, well, God is within. And I always thought that too. And there's something in each one of us, and I think I'd like to turn it around the other way. I don't think God exists within us as much as we abide within God, because, and I just use the word God, which is probably a bad word, but anyway, it's
all the words are bad words.
All the words are bad, but God doesn't need Bob Cergol to be. Bob Cergol needs God to be. So I don't think I can. I'm not anterior to God Himself. That's the ego thing. It's like that. That's where I'm going to have an experience of God. I'm more powerful than God, and I'm going to contain God. When in reality, the only way that I can realize my oneness with God and that I am God, is by my dissolution. And how this dissolved thing, how you can take a drop of water and drop it in the ocean, and there's no boundaries. The drop disappears into the ocean. How can the drop have any awareness as a drop of the ocean? That's inexplainable. The only, that's when people start to write poems or come up with crazy metaphors, it's only like God realizing God. It's the power, the power of attention doesn't belong to me. I'm not aware. There's the power of attention, awareness, is anterior to me, and it's like somebody drew a circle, the boundary of this body. As soon as you draw a boundary, that boundary takes on the properties of its source. Another way of saying it is that even God doesn't have the power to. Everything He touches is God. He doesn't have the power to split Himself. Another image that I've had and that's occurred to me is I'm fascinated with mirror images. If God holds up a mirror and starts to turn his face and look in the mirror, at just the instant when the eyes are going to make contact, because everything God touches is God, that reflection became enlivened and looked away into that mirror world, into that reflected world, and spawned a whole creation that was just a reflection of this of the real God.
Yeah, well, the thought just came to me that I hope that people who listen to those descriptions that you just gave, those metaphors, sit with those for a bit, because that's you're falling into poetry, Bob.
Well, one of the with this mirror thing, one of the questions I posed at some presentation, and I don't think I did a very good job with it. Is the problem? Somebody has to sit with it on their own. But just imagine if we every morning, most people, I do, I wash my face in front of over a sink in front of a mirror, and I brush my teeth in front of a mirror, shave in front of a mirror. So we walk in front of a mirror, we expect to see ourselves. Or what if you were turning quickly in front of a mirror and turn there, and as soon as you expect the object of your attention, you expect it to land on a reflection of yourself. You expect to see yourself reflected back. What if you did that and you saw nothing? Where would your attention land? I mean, the shock of not seeing yourself. Then what would you be looking at? Maybe it's a crazy exercise, but to me it's kind of like some sort of metaphor is how we're always staring into a mirror. Everything we look at, our whole life experience is something that we're using, or not that we're doing it with will, but it's reflecting ourselves back. It's a reflection of us. So we're seeing ourselves. So if we can just stop looking externally at the experience, at the reflection, and start looking in the opposite direction of what is seeing. Look at the looker. And use the old cliche. You can't do any of that volitionally, though. It's not like you can sit down and say, I'm going to look at the looker. I mean, you can make attempts, and they're worthwhile to do. But I think Rose's, what I hadn't encountered anywhere else, or haven't seen written about, is his beginner's level meditation, which is not entirely just relaxing and breathing or staring at the wall. It's okay, that's all preparatory just to kind of calm the body and mind down. But now look at yourself. How do you look at yourself? You look at yourself in action. So pick some past action that was an affliction to the sense of self. Look at something that called your existence into question, because that's what every affliction is, no matter how trivial. At the root, when it echoes down the hall of mirrors, at some point it's basically, do you really exist? What's going to happen to you when you die? So if you look at that sort of an affliction to the sense of self, that's the oblique, indirect way of asking the question, who am I? I think it's a more effective way of asking the question, because the object of the attention is then looking inward in a way that it transcends intellect. And it may seem like you're spinning your wheels when you do that, because you'll probably generate a lot of thought along the way. You can turn away from the thought and go back to just looking at that. I think it's the most direct way of looking at the sense of self, asking the question, who am I? And then when you stop making the effort to do that, something carries on. It's like you start doing that from a with a sense of volition. Here, I'm going to do this, and you do it, and you try to keep doing it, and that process is the less important part of it. I'm convinced, I know this from my own experience, that at the end of that meditation, there's a looking, that something, there's some coasting, there's some continued looking. You've gotten closer to your source somehow. I mean, not that you can, it's not that you can never get away from your source, but in terms of what are you looking at? And so you're always looking at your sense of self, and then through that sense of self, you're looking at the world. So how are you going to stop all that? I think that's, and Rose is the only one I've ever come across that recommends that as a meditational discipline and calls it going within. To me, the process of going within is experienced as a loss of self. So anyone that goes down this path, with this kind of a meditation, and it's along the way there, the obstacles that come up is that there's resistance. Nobody wants to lose themselves. They want to add to themselves, and that's the conundrum with spiritual work, spiritual path, because no matter how much somebody may have intellectually learned or agreed or read that, oh yeah, spiritual realization is not adding to myself, it's transcending myself, it doesn't matter. You can't. You can't help yourself. That's what everybody does. They cannot conceive of removing themselves from the equation. Everything they do is I'm on the path, and I'm the one that's going to get the result, and I'm the one that's going to be increased by the result, mm-hmm. and benefit by the mm-hmm. result. And that you can have wonderful experiences and realizations along that way, and probably become a better person in the process even. But that's not what's going to remain of you after you die. And it's possible before you die to know what that is through this kind of a meditation discipline and spiritual path of a reverse vector.
Do you certainly a question that people have, even after having listened to your description of how enlightenment is not additive, it's not about a person who becomes enlightened. Still, people want to know, after enlightenment, is Bob Cergol, is he any different, the personality, and is he happier? Is his life more peaceful? Is he more content about money or relationships? Can you say anything towards that?
Yeah, that's kind of paradoxical, because I've mm-hmm. It's in some, I could say that in many respects it's made everything better in that I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied on a macro level, on an existential level. I don't have any questions about. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not. I'm content. I can return to this place almost at will. When I say return to it, again, it's never not with me, but I can, the immediacy of the. I don't know how to say it. It's like call it a mood even. I sometimes I just feel less down in the pig trough, making a living and being in this world. And other times I feel like I'm more outside of the world, and I can. It's not hard for me to get in that frame of mind when I want to. I just have to withdraw my attention from inward. And so so that's a benefit. But on the flip side of that, I think it's made me more, in my case anyway, it's made me more susceptible to pain, in the sense of this life the whole drama that surrounds me, it just becomes overwhelming. At times, it's too poignant. It's too yeah, it's too poignant. I guess that's the best word. You find it in poetry from the likes of the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam. It's like, the it stanzas like, that spring should vanish with the rose, that youth's sweet-scented manuscript should close, the nightingale that in the branches sang, whence and whither flown again, who knows? It's like I weep for the churning of the drama, the passing, the birth and death of things. Another line that I always think of from that poem, it's not, maybe it doesn't particularly seem profound, but it's very moving to me. He writes, I sometimes think that never blows so red the rose as where some buried Caesar bled, that every hyacinth the garden wears dropped in its lap from some once lovely head. And this delightful herb whose tender green fledges the river's lip on which we lean, lean upon it lightly, for who knows from what once lovely lip it springs unseen. That kind of writing kind of captures the mood that I fall into frequently, and I've asked myself the question, like, why doesn't this realization make me feel continually joyful? Or I don't know. I think it's because it's just my personality. It's the body that I was born with, and the nervous system I was born with, and it's how this character reacts. Like I said, there's enlightenment is not an experience. It's a realization. I'm not even sure that that's an adequate word, but it's definitely not an experience. But there definitely is an intense experience of some sort associated with it, because there's a mind, a body, and a personality that remembers it and is associated with it, and that machinery reacts, and so I have a certain reaction to it. So I don't know. I don't think it hasn't changed anything. No one. I don't think I would ever say, or anybody could ever say that this is going to make things better. It's not going to make things worse. It's not going to fix things. It's basically not going to change who I am. I mean, in terms of a personality. I mean, I'm not going to get as I can't get as attached to things. I was never obsessed with a career. I mean, I never felt like my career defined me, and before the realization, but if anything, less so after. It's like it's just not important. But I have to do it. And then I'm the type of personality that whatever I do, I'm not going to do a half-assed job with. So I throw myself into it, and I'm either going to do a good job at what I'm working on, or I'm not going to do it at all.
Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer, Bob, but I do want to ask that if a person who listened to this wanted to get in touch with you or meet up with you, what's the best way to go about that?
I really prefer communicating with people in writing, and I feel strongly that when somebody writes a letter, they're making something manifest. It's not just words that come out and disappear. It's like they have to compose their thoughts, and then they see what they just said on paper, and maybe they edit it. And anyway, when I read somebody's letter, if sometimes I'm moved by a letter. It evokes something in me, because it's like their voice is inside my head, and I hear them inside my head, and I can turn that around and speak back to them, and they hear my voice inside their head. So I think there's the opportunity to actually communicate beyond words through written words in a way that when you're sitting in front of somebody, particularly in front of a stranger, or maybe in front of somebody you've known for too long. I don't know. It depends on the context. Body language and form can be such a distraction. But at any rate, I'm not I'm not at a point where I want to go out and I go to TAP meetings pretty much. I'm going to be down in the Raleigh. They're having a retreat. The TIG group down there is having some retreat in October, and I agreed to go to that, so I'll go there and meet with people. And I never regret doing that. I always enjoy going to those meetings and interacting with people, but it's not the sort of thing I ever seek out. So anyway, the long-winded answer to your question, I'm willing to reply to written correspondence, but I don't particularly want to meet people face to face right now. I'm not up for doing Skype sessions.
So if there'll actually be show notes for this episode on the website. So if I left an email contact for you, people could email you and then perhaps set up a written correspondence. Is that how it might work?
Yeah, I mean, if you can publish an email address, the TAD email address, and more than likely I'll respond. I mean, I have to admit, I've gotten some emails from people that are just I don't pick up the sincerity, or I pick up something there. I've gotten emails from people that they talk about such phenomenal things, like they're into some sort of magic, or I mean something that's just so foreign and far removed from me. I'm puzzled as to why they would even write me. But what they write me is just, sometimes I just ignore it and don't answer, or sometimes I'll just maybe write something to, in a way that hopefully it won't go anywhere. But, sometimes I'm really moved by something somebody writes. I think the difference is if somebody opens up, if somebody is writing and has something to say, I feel an obligation to reply. Even it's very time consuming. Part of me, I don't want you to do something that's going to generate a deluge of email here, because I'm not in a position to answer it. I get an email from somebody and I might answer it right then and there, or it might sit in I might read it and then think, I got to answer that, and then a week goes by. I can't commit to any kind of I'm not in a position right now to commit to schedule of response.
Sure. So a suggestion might be that you're not particularly open to casual conversation with people, but if someone was particularly struck by something that you talked about in this podcast and really gave a thoughtful question of you or request, that you might be able to respond to that.
Yes, that's a good way of saying it. If some phrase I turned really strikes a chord, and that person thinks, I think Bob can help me in some way, be with some facet, or so I'm writing, and then sure. But I don't want to debate philosophy with anybody. I had some correspondence recently from somebody from Europe, and just super intelligent and super well read and super knowledgeable, and they wanted to engage. They perceive me as somebody with knowledge and perspective, and so they wanted to engage. But it wasn't for. I mean, I didn't get what the purpose was, other than to get into the how many angels on the head of a pin sort of thing. And it's hard enough. It's enough of an effort to actually write something serious and meaningful to help somebody. So I don't have time to I'm not interested in philosophical discussions. There's so many good books about there. There's other better sources for that sort of communication.
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there a book that you've often recommended to people?
Well, among Rose's writings, I've told plenty of people that if the only book that Richard Rose ever wrote, if of all the books that he wrote, if there was only one that they could ever read, then it would be The Psychology of the Observer. Would probably be the book I would tell them. I have told people to read. I Am That by Nisargadatta. I'm almost hesitate on that one because that book is just unbelievably profound. But I never read it until after my realization. And I remember reading books like that, like Ramana Maharshi's writings even. They didn't. Honestly, they didn't mean anything to me. I couldn't grasp anything from them. But people who read Nisargadatta, I think it's like reading lullabies. Too many people, what they get from that book is the equivalent of lullabies. So I don't know. I guess I'm sort of recommending I Am That, but cautioning that I'm not sure that the danger with a book like that is you immerse yourself in the feeling that the writing evokes, and then take that as some fruit of your own perspective or knowledge or realization. And instead of finding out for yourself, you just read Nisargadatta and experience the afterglow.
Do you have any advice about what a person? I know many people who do enjoy reading Nisargadatta, and I Am That. Is there what should they do reading a passage from that book?
Well, I think one approach would be a book like that is to sit down and just open it up at random, because there's not many books you can do that with, but that is one. You can literally just open it up at random to one page, and then read maybe that one page, maybe a few paragraphs from that page, or maybe a page and a half, and then stop and sit with that. But then at some point, turn it around and see if you can apply it yourself. The thing I hear quoted from Nisargadatta more than anything else is in connection with this concept of effortlessness, and effortlessness. And they overlook the fact that probably if you did a word count on a digital file of that, I haven't done that, but I imagine if you did a word count of the word earnest, you'd find the word earnest in there more often than you'd find the word effortless. Mm-hmm. So what does he mean by, he's big on doing whatever he's talking about with earnestness. He says you have to be earnest. That's Rose's. You have to be committed. You have to be serious. You're not going to, you have to look in order to see, and reading someone else's words is not looking. You can maybe be inspired, maybe evoked. Looking inside yourself can be evoked. But what you have to look at is not how somebody else makes you feel. What you have to look at is you have to look at your own, your own self. You have to see yourself in action. So you have to look at how you live your own life. Look at your own life. Look at your own thoughts. Why you do what you do. And see where that leads you. And Nisargadatta might be helpful in that. He might be a nice interlude to that. So, Sean, let me wrap this up. I was digging through. I ripped out a page from one of those little teeny spiral notebooks. Those little pocket things people carry with to make notes. And I was at an airport one time, and I was just thinking, okay, what if I was going to write down like a list of things that encapsulate things, what would it be? And so I had this scribbled notes here. The first one was 1, define yourself. What are you? 2, see clearly. Reverse the vector of your attention. 3, watch the watcher. Cultivate the doubt sensation. 4, take action. Challenge yourself. All experience either magnifies or diminishes your sense of self. Don't look away from that which cast doubt on who and what you take yourself to be, because that you have been doing since birth. 5, be wary of thought, because it's purely reactionary and follows the body. 6, make a commitment and keep it. 7, daily examination of conscience. 8, pray. And 9, help others. And that would be my cliff notes or cheat sheet.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for your time as well.